My name's Gordon Trail. I'm spent 28 years in the Army and I was discharged as a Warrant Officer Class 2. I joined the Army in 1975, which was just post-Vietnam. So when I got to 57 RAR, which was an infantry battalion, they were a pretty hard-nosed bunch of guys. So I learnt very quickly as a young 19-year-old that you didn't back answer these guys because they were pretty tough. And they'd just come back, as I said, a couple of years from the jungles of Vietnam. And then I went on to serve for my career as a chef in the Army. And I had postings all around Australia. And one of the prime jobs I did have was working as the personal chef to the Chief of Defence Force at the time. And I spent a couple of years in Canberra there, and I loved every minute of it. And then I had a couple of instructional postings as a sergeant and as a warrant officer at the school. So that was a really helpful job that I did there, and really enjoyed doing that role, encouraging young chefs to become better at what they do. And my whole aim was to provide the best food possible that I could for soldiers both in the barracks and in the field. At the end of '98, I took discharge from the Army, and I was sitting at home on September 11 and watching the World Trade Center towers go down, and I turned to my wife and said, well, if it can happen there, it can happen here. So within 6 weeks of the September 11 attacks, I was back in the Army as a warrant officer, and they sent me, and within 6 weeks I was sent to Victoria Barracks in Melbourne to run a desk and be involved in a major multi-million-dollar catering project, and that didn't sit well with me. So I'd spent a lot of my time over the next 2 years working out how I could get to a place where they were going to go overseas to places like Iraq or Afghanistan. And in 2004, my family, I packed up my family, well, part of the family. I had my wife and my two daughters, and we headed off to Darwin in 2004. My other sons, one was studying to be a chiropractor in New Zealand, and my other son was doing his Masters in Arts at the university here in Melbourne. So they didn't come with us to Darwin. So once we got to Darwin, it was a very military town, and it was geared up to go to war, basically, the Robertson Barracks, and we were on pretty high alert. And so within a short period of time being there, I knew that I was heading to Iraq as part of security detachment. And in that role, as a warrant officer, I had two roles. One was, of course, the catering role, but the other role I had was as I worked in the operations room and manning the radios and keeping an eye on our patrols outside of our barrack, well, the building that we lived in. So we were out in the red zone, basically right in the middle of Baghdad. Next door was the Australian consulate, where the ambassador had to get around Baghdad in a safe manner, and that was our role, was to make sure that him and the Australian people that came over to do business with Iraq could get around in a safe manner. So, yeah, and going in there, I was 48 years old at the time, so it was like going to war with my with my sons. And I really got to take my hat off to these young soldiers, 22, 24-year-olds, and the corporals, the section commanders, they're making boardroom decisions on the spot, and it's a matter of life and death for those guys. So, I had a really great admiration for these guys. Yeah. So it was a bit strange, like the first night I remember coming back, and my wife and girls, we said, let's go out and we'll have some dinner. So we went out and things just didn't seem like, it was surreal. And it was really hard to comprehend that I was out of a war zone 24 hours and back into normality. And you know, and the first night, you know, sleep didn't come easy for me at all. It was difficult to, you know, process all this. As a warrant officer, I went and did a course. The course they ran was a course which involved the middle level management, warrant officers, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and that. And it was to do with looking out for signs that that may affect your soldiers coming back from conflict areas. And so here I am sitting in there, and they're doing all this talk, and all these red flags were popping up, and I'm thinking, something's not quite right here. But you know, I thought, it's just a phase; it will go away, and things like that. But yeah, things didn't go away, and you know, and then I was medically discharged in 2006, and that was a hard pill to swallow, because you know, I thought, they said, yeah, we can send you down here and do a course on PTSD, and I thought, yeah, I'd just get on my bike again and start riding, but it wasn't the case. And like PTSD, it's an illness, it's not a choice. You know, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. So transitioning out of the army was quite difficult, because that had been part of my life for so long. You know, my kids had grown up as army children, and my wife, she came with me on every posting around Australia. And it wasn't until I was when I was out of the army, how difficult I found it was to for my wife's side of things, because you know, she just came along and she did what she had to do and keep the family going and that. But with me, you know, I would go to a posting, I would mingle in quite well, because we knew each other, and you know, you get to serve with a lot of different people all over Australia. But for the wife and the family, it was difficult, you know, they had to make new friends, new doctors, new dentists, all that sort of thing. And it was really, yeah, I found it, after all these years, I went, oh, geez, she did a really good job. So, yeah, they deserved the medals, not the soldiers. Well, the immediate challenge was loss of work, you know, working life. And, you know, I was 51 when I was discharged, so I still had a good few years left of me, I thought, but the Army deemed that I was not fit to serve anymore because of PTSD. But it wasn't just the PTSD. I carried a lot of injuries as well. I had neck injuries, which were really debilitating, and also lower back injuries. And that's just with normal army training and the physical work, because, you know, you're just not just a cook, you know, you're everything other. You know, you still had to go to the range and do shoots and things like that. And, you know, you still had to do all the training that all the infantry and that the pre-deployment trainings, you know, you had to go through the gas chamber, you had to get the pepper spray in your eyes, and you see all these big, top, young, fit guys crying like babies after seeing them get hit in the face with pepper spray and that. So, yeah. And the hardest thing was, and the effect it had on the family, you know, because all of a sudden, you know, something's wrong with Dad, you know. But they couldn't see that, you know, as kids and that. Well, my eldest boys and that, they could see that there was something wrong. But my young daughters and that, they didn't understand what was happening. And then the extended family, they saw me as Gordon, and, you know, nothing wrong. Yeah, they couldn't see any damage, but it was internal that really, really suffer. So for people, there's that big black hole there staring down and, you know, am I going to get better? You know, how am I going to get better? So there you become, you know, because I was a little bit older, I knew that I needed to get help, because my wife, she was saying to me, you really need something done, So then we went through the big slippery dip with dealing with Veteran Affairs. And one of the things that I really want to point out to younger veterans is, if you know that there's something wrong with you, go and get some help, because, they can help you. And don't blame the Army, Air Force, Navy, because once you take discharge, you don't belong to that service anymore. And that's one of the big things that people on the outside, they don't understand that. They think that, the Army's not doing anything for you, but it's really not the Army's position. They've made their decision on discharging you medically. So it's the thing what happens now, you become part of DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs, and they deal in legislation. They don't deal in the day-to-day struggles that veterans have. So, and they can only deal with what legislation is put in front of them. So that's where there is a lot of problems, and that's where ESOs come to the fore. And that's one of the things. I was fairly lucky that I had a friend of mine who was very good at dealing with this nightmare, because he'd walked the same path as I was beginning my journey. So, so go and get help. Ask people. Ask your wife to, get you some help, or your partner and your kids. Do it for your kids and yourself and your family, because you really need to get your head straight. When I decided that I did need help, and then I crossed that line, and the line was an invisible line. That the line was I needed to get help, and people say, oh yeah, but I'm not going to go and get help, because you've got to take tablets and pills, you've got to go and see all these doctors. Well, so be it, So it took, probably 4 or 5 years, 6 years later, after taking medications and that, just to get your head right and deal with what was happening. And, you still deal with those same issues, but it's a lot more duller now, so, with medication. So, and one of the things that, as a older veteran, but with a young veteran's outlook is, when you're dealing with these issues, be comfortable with your GP, your specialist, and if you're not happy with them, go and get someone else. But you have to be able to work with these professional medical people to get better. I think they can help out by being listened to a little bit more, and to join together as one, because like back in the day in the First World War, when the World War I chaps came back, they got together and they had a voice, and that voice was to become the RSL, and as the history tells us, that each conflict that Australian politicians send off Australian troops and some come back damaged is, we'll let the RSL deal with that. But then the RSL, the old guys, they don't think that, there's anything wrong with these younger veterans. So it's a perpetual sore point, and and it's, all the younger veterans want to do is feel belong to somewhere, and that's where they don't know where to belong. Like when I took discharge, there was a program called which the Vietnam veterans set up, which was Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service. So as a person needing some help, I said, well, I didn't belong in that area, the VVCS. And now they've changed that to Veterans Counselling Service, which encompasses all veterans, not just Vietnam veterans. So it's the wording and so forth.